I am thrilled to have you here today because we have created this new space, or we're working on creating this new space in New London where we can have art classes, music classes, all types of classes, as well as a fine art and craft gallery. So it's all part of these new plans that we have to allow our community to tap into their creativity. So I'm really thrilled about that.
Right.
Then we're going to have our first watercolor painting class with you on November 23rd. I would love to have you introduce yourself a little bit and share a little bit more about your background.
Okay. My name is Robert O'Brien, and I've been painting in watercolor for over 50 years. I started in high school, and I I loved it when I started, and I just still love it. It's a challenging medium, um, but I think once you get the hang of it, it really is magical. I studied art in college. I went to the University of Buffalo in New York, studied some art there. When I was there in the early 70s, they did not offer watercolor classes. Watercolor was not considered a primary medium back then, which is okay. I mean, it is what it is. And so I studied I studied drawing, sculpture, printmaking, which the printmaking process back then was lithography, which is pretty much not used anymore. But it's good. I've always loved to draw. I moved to Vermont in 1977, and I got a job at a map company as a cartographer, small map company in Vermont, Chester, Vermont, which is no longer in business. I did that for a couple of years. I also had experience in construction building, and I was a building contractor for 30 years, as long as, as well as I continued with my art, and started showing in galleries in the early 80s, started teaching workshops in the early 80s. And in the 90s, I started entering competitions, first regional competitions, and then towards the late 90s, early 2000s, national competitions. I am a signature member of the American Watercolor Society, which is a very prestigious organization based in New York City. And I'm also a master signature member of the National Watercolor Society, which is also a very prestigious organization based in Los Angeles. I am also a signature member of the New England Watercolor Society, the Northeast Watercolor Society, and the Vermont Watercolor Society.
Ah,
And
it's wonderful.
I have I'm affiliated with the Edgewater Gallery in Middlebury, Vermont, right now, and also a small gallery in Springfield, Vermont, which is near where I live. So
Yeah, well, tell me a little bit about watercolor as a medium, because I've learned recently that really you can use a variety of different paints or product, I guess, and you can technically call it watercolor. So you could use gouache, you could use anything if you're adding a lot of water. Is that true?
it is.
Yeah.
In fact, the American Watercolor Society, which is probably the most prestigious watercolor society, I would say, in the world, um, allows acrylic, gouache, casein, any medium, any water-based medium is allowed. I personally find that transparent watercolor, just as far as the process goes, is quite different than painting in acrylics and casein. Uh, both of those mediums are opaque, and it's actually a little more like painting in oil. You can paint light over dark in those mediums where you can't in watercolor. Watercolor is a one-way street, so to speak. You have to start light and go dark. It's the only way you can really do it. When you have a medium like that, you really have to think about your painting. You have to plan it out. I start with a lot of washes. Towards the end of my painting, I start putting in my darker values and my details. So that's kind of how I paint.
Fascinating.
Yeah,
That's so fascinating to me.
it is. It is. There are also some watercolor societies the Transparent Watercolor Society is one. That's another one that I am a member of. That they're based in the Chicago area. There are three major watercolor societies in the country: the American National and the Transparent, which is a Midwestern society. They will only allow paintings done exclusively in transparent watercolor for their shows, and if they see any even the slightest bit of gouache or any type of opaque, the painting won't be allowed to be in the show.
I think that's probably what many of us equate to or think of traditionally as watercolor in a lot of ways is maybe that transparent type
Yeah,
version.
that's really, totally transparent. A lot of oil painters um, did preliminary studies in watercolor. John Singer Sargent, for sure, was one. He painted a lot of watercolor, and he did a lot of watercolors on location, and they're beautiful. But that was probably 100 years ago. He painted, so things have changed a little bit since then. I don't even know if acrylic was around back then.
One of the things that I think is, I think of when I think of watercolor is the temperament, which, we could all be intimidated by different mediums. And I seem to be intimidated by many of them. But watercolor has always been one of the ones, at least for me, that I was like, oh, well, I don't know that I can do watercolor because it
Yeah,
is so particular and seems to be very unforgiving,
it
if you
is. Yeah,
will.
it's a probably the most intimidating painting medium that I know of. You have to approach it in a specific way, and that's kind of how I teach it. We start with our light washes, and we build. I use a process often called the layering process, where I'll layer a wash over a wash to get the value down to where I want it. Everybody paints differently. Some artists start with their darks and go light. I use a value scale. I'll show it to you. I have it right here. I use this to check my values when
Oh,
I paint. This is a little thing that probably costs about $2, $3 in the art store. And it's one of the best tools I've ever bought for painting.
wow. So how does that help you in your process?
Well, when I'm painting, the thing with watercolor too is you're painting on white paper. So when you put a wash down, it looks dark. It could be a value 9. It could be this value, just a little bit darker than the white, but because there's just nothing but white paper there, it just your perception of it is dark. I use it to check, when I put washes down, I put this on my dry. The wash has to dry because the paint dries lighter than when you first put it on. I check it and make sure that I've achieved the value that I want before moving on. That's sort of part of the layering process too. I may put a light value down, a light wash on a certain thing, and when it dries, it might be lighter than it needs to be, and then I will just go back over it with the same color and make it. But it's something that I stress when in my workshops. Just the whole process of it, starting out with your washes, your light values. Values are very important in painting. Color is okay, but I think values are doing something and getting your values right. It makes for a much better painting. I think it certainly has made my paintings better.
I'm sorry, it's obvious, right? Because color is right there in your face. So of course color, intuitively matters. But I think you're right in the sense that the dynamic and the interest of your artwork is enhanced if you understand value really well.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
and it's not something we may intuitively think of right away.
Yeah.
So I think that's spot on. One of the things I wonder for this class is what kind of person do you think would do well in this class? Do they need to have an understanding of watercolor before they come, or should they have a little bit of understanding?
I've taught beginner classes. I've taught students that have never painted before. I think it's helpful if you have painted a little bit, have a little bit experience with it. Having some drawing ability is helpful too, because You really have to do a lot of drawing in watercolor. Kind of gear my teaching to someone who is very new at it, and people that have taken it too. So I think I always say for my classes, open to all abilities with some watercolor experience suggested. So that's kind of what I,
Gotcha.
it's how I kind of advertise
Gotcha.
classes. Yeah.
And I think, if anyone out there's a little bit like me, like you've dabbled in it enough to know that it's hard and that
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
might be, or that there's something to it that maybe I don't know. And so that's probably a good place for this person. And I imagine that there are people who have, worked on watercolor that can still learn a lot from your classes. So maybe they, have, accomplished some nice pieces, but they can always learn another approach and gather some and glean some different, great benefits from this workshop, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, one of the other things I've learned from my limited experience with watercolor is tools matter and
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
materials matter.
Oh,
And so
yeah.
I'm grateful. So anyone doing this class can go on our website and see the material list. But I'm curious, have you kind of found like your favorites or the things that work best? Because paper seems to be like one of the number one things outside of the, type of watercolor base you're going to use as the most important thing because papers will warp, will move, will shift, will change, and it really depends on that quality. So you really can't use this any kind of paper for this medium, isn't that right?
Absolutely. Paper is the number one thing. I use blocks, which are 20 pieces of paper glued together, and it's made by
Mm.
Arches. It's a company that makes watercolor paper, and I think Arches is a paper that I use pretty much exclusively. It's the best, in my opinion, it's the best paper out there. Also, the surface of Arches paper is far better to paint on than the cheap paper. I really highly not recommend students go out and buy like a pad for $5 that says it's watercolor paper because they'll be really disappointed. So I think paper is number one. I think brushes probably is next. You can get good brushes these days for, I'd say, reasonably priced brushes that are good. You don't want to get like real cheap brushes. If you go into a store like Michael's or something, and you see they're having a sale on a pack of 20 brushes for $5. You don't want to buy them because they're not any good. I'll show you a brush that I like. These are Winsor Newton brushes. They're called Scepter Gold. I'd say a brush like this is probably less than $10, and it's a good brush. I use these a lot. Um, they last a long time. They keep a point really well. And I'd say for someone who's starting out, that would be a good one. This is another brand that I like. This is a synthetic brush made by Escoda. This is a size 8. They're a little more money, but they're a really good brush. This is $36 for this brush. So that is also, a good brush to get. You're really better off spending money on good brushes. You don't have to get. I think if you started out with maybe 4 or 5, you'd be fine. You don't need to get a whole, set of them.
Now I know from having dabbled in oil paints and, acrylic that there's different brushes for different purposes, right? Because you
Mhm.
want to get, you want a thin one for detail, you want a fan one if you're going to try to get some of that like tree detail or something. I mean, you want, well, different shapes for different reasons. In watercolor, is that the same case, or is it you pretty much just want different sizes of a similar style?
Well, I use flat and round brushes, and this is a flat brush that I use. This is an inch and a
Mm.
half. I use this for washes. I have a 2-inch brush. I can get this is a 2-inch brush. These brushes I've had for decades, and you can see the paint's wearing off, but they still work pretty well. Both of these brushes are blends of sable and synthetic. Now, sable brushes are made from the tail of the Kolinsky. It's like a weasel that lives in Russia, and they're really expensive. And I don't think there's some of them are really hard to get. They're very good brushes, but they're expensive. Um, a brush. I have this is a size 10 red sable. I've had this for a long time, probably 20, 25 years. And I paid $110 for it that long ago. It's probably about $300 now, just for one.
Wow.
You don't need to buy a brush like this. You can buy these Scepter Golds. Scepter Gold even makes a flat brush. It's a 1 inch flat. They even make a size 12. This is a good size brush. You can see
Okay.
Scepter Gold.
Gotcha.
And I've had this brush for years, and it still has a good point. It holds a lot of paint. Um, you know,
So is that the important thing? You want it to hold a lot of pain, or
you
you want
do.
to have it shaped a certain way? So I guess my last thought or question is kind of, for someone so experienced as yourself and to really anybody, what would your top 5 tips maybe be to people who are interested in pursuing watercolor?
My top 5 tip is practice. My tips are all technique oriented because watercolor is a medium that you have to have a really good technique in order to make it work. It's not like you just dab paint on the paper. You have to have be skilled at particular techniques, and probably the most important technique for a beginner is to put a good wash down. And I recommend using a big brush to do that. These brushes are hard to use if you've never used one before, and you have to practice. Just practice on a scrap piece of paper, of watercolor paper. But if you get the feel of it, getting a smooth wash is very important. Where you start, you want to just bring that bead of water down so as it's wet, because watercolor paint dries really quickly as soon as it gets on the paper. And within a number of seconds it'll start to dry, and you've got to really work at it, move it quickly. Another technique that I use a lot is called a dry brush technique. And it's not really a dry brush. It's a brush that has not a lot of paint on it. So when it touches the watercolor paper is textured. It has little hills and little valleys. So it'll hit the tips of the texture, but it won't get down into the crevices. And it's a nice technique. It really makes for a pretty nice effect. So those are the main things. I think technique is really important to learn right off the bat. Number one, you really need to practice it a lot. Think about your values. I always tell my students to get one of these value finders. Also get a color wheel. Color wheels are important. Yeah, it's interesting that these basic things that are out there that you can, like a color wheel and a value scale, you can buy at any art store. They're just excellent tools for a painter, for any painter, for a oil painter or a watercolor painter.
Would you say that what if someone were to become or want to pursue watercolor, that it's pretty expensive or more expensive in some ways? I imagine they all kind of add up to be about the same because oils
Yeah,
can be
I
expensive
would
and
think so too. But
yeah,
watercolor is kind of expensive if you have to get good materials. So
yeah.
you're talking you know, $200 to $300 probably of an initial expense. And that, I think it's kind of a cruel irony, but if you buy cheap materials, cheap paints, cheap brushes, and cheap paper, you're not going to have a good experience, and you're probably not going to want to pursue it. But if you spend the money right off and get good quality materials, you see how much better it is, how much easier it is to use. I think it'll motivate you to want to paint more.
So true. I just think of all the different mediums there are out there, um, and really just so many wonderful things you see, and you can go. We do a lot of exhibits, and it's easy to go and say, wow, that looks beautiful, because a lot of this day and age you can just use AI and it comes up with a beautiful picture, or
Right.
you can do so many different things. But if you really dig into, and not much, just dig in a little bit to what it takes to do some of these beautiful portraits and pictures and art pieces of art that we get to see and enjoy, that are done by hand, there's so much art to it. And I think that's where a lot of times that word comes from in some ways, is because there's been such skill and craft and work and time and effort put into it to get to that point, to be able to kind of master the medium to do what you want it to do.
Oh
Because
yeah.
it doesn't just do it.
I think another thing that we have available now with the internet is you can watch a lot of watercolor videos, you can see how people paint. There are a lot of people that do live demonstrations with watercolor, and I think if you see that, it helps you kind of understand how it's done. I know we all paint a little bit differently, but it's the main thing is if you're just working in watercolor and not a more opaque medium like acrylic or gouache, you start light and you build up your darks. That's sort of the standard way to do it. Another thing, you can go to a watercolor show. There's a lot of watercolor shows. There's a lot around Boston. New England Watercolor Society has 3 shows a year. And,
Oh, wow.
we have a watercolor society in Vermont. And go to the Museum of Fine Arts. You can see some watercolors there. It's just seeing paintings is motivating. At least to me, it is.
Just from your personal opinion, maybe. Why do you think watercolor is such an excellent medium? What sets it apart?
I like it because it's always a challenge and I never get bored with it. I do a variety of subjects and I really like to challenge myself, and I love it. I never get tired of it. I've been doing it for over 50 years. Everything I paint is like, oh, it's a new adventure. But it's such a challenging medium. I like it. I like to be challenged.
And what might make it worthwhile or inspiring to someone who might be that intimidated person with watercolor?
If the person really wants to do it and really practices, really makes a point of, I want to get good at this. It's very rewarding to see a watercolor that's finished that you're happy with. It's just, there's something about the look of it, the transparency of it. It's so beautiful. You can get very, very realistic in watercolor, especially as far as light effects go. It's really amazing.
Yeah, it's a little bit more diverse than I had thought, because
It's very diverse. There are painters that are very abstract.
Yes, we have a couple in the area who are just a couple different watercolors who are phenomenal at understanding it and making it work for them. But yeah, there's a lot of diversity in it, and I think you can be anywhere from abstract to realist, and you can be anywhere from the transparent version to some versions with a little opaque and at least the contrast of the light and dark value. So it really is a fantastic, I think when done well, it has that kind of wow effect.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe that's why the challenge, part of what makes the challenge worthwhile is the reward is so great, right?
Oh, yeah, it is.